Imagine standing at the edge of time, where empires rise and fall, civilizations flourish and vanish, and the human story unfolds in ways more shocking than any fiction. From the first flickers of life in ancient river valleys to the sprawling metropolises of the modern age, every moment of history has shaped the world we inhabit today. But what if the events we know are only fragments of a much larger, untold story? A story of ambition, conquest, mystery, and survival that echoes through the ages and still resonates in the world around us. History is not just a series of dates and battles. It is a living, breathing saga, full of triumphs and tragedies, secrets and revolutions. From the dawn of civilization, humanity has carved its path across continents, leaving behind monuments, myths, and memories. Ancient kings and queens, explorers and inventors, warriors and philosophers, all have played a part in shaping our destiny. This documentary takes you on an epic journey across time, exploring the rise and fall of civilizations, the forces that drove empires, and the moments that changed the course of human history forever. Before we journey through the sands of time and the corridors of power, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that reshapes your understanding of the past. The story of humanity begins not with kings or empires, but with survival. Thousands of years ago, small groups of hunter-gatherers roamed across Africa, chasing herds, gathering plants, and struggling against a world that offered no certainty. Fire became their greatest ally, its warmth, its protection, its ability to transform food. With stone tools clutched in their hands, these early humans were unaware that they were shaping the very destiny of the species. Every strike of a flint against rock was a spark in the long march toward civilization. As humans migrated across continents, from the savannas of Africa to the icy frontiers of Europe and Asia, they carried with them more than just survival instincts. They carried curiosity. Slowly, over tens of thousands of years, that curiosity transformed into innovation. Speech allowed ideas to travel farther than footsteps. Stories were passed from one generation to the next, and memory became the glue of society. With language came the ability to plan, to dream, and to unite. Humanity was no longer just surviving. It was beginning to build. And then came a discovery that would alter everything: agriculture. In the fertile floodplains of Mesopotamia, along the Tigris and Euphrates, people planted seeds into the earth and learned to harness rivers for irrigation. The cycle of seasons became the cycle of life. Farming anchored people to the land, and villages emerged. No longer endlessly nomadic, these communities grew into cities, and cities into civilizations. Humanity had stepped into a new world, one defined not by survival, but by creation. Mesopotamia, often called the cradle of civilization, gave birth to remarkable innovations. The wheel, the plow, written language, each invention propelled society forward. Cuneiform tablets recorded laws, trade, and even myths, ensuring that voices from 5,000 years ago still whisper to us today. Towering ziggurats rose above city skylines, symbols of human ambition reaching toward the heavens. But beneath the grandeur lay fragile foundations, as rival city-states clashed for dominance. Conflict, it seemed, was as ancient as civilization itself. Further west, along the Nile, another mighty power emerged. Ancient Egypt was a civilization that defied time itself. The Nile's predictable floods nourished their crops, turning deserts into fields of gold. Pharaohs, seen as gods on earth, commanded armies, priests, and artisans to shape a kingdom that would endure for millennia. Pyramids, colossal tombs of stone, were constructed with mathematical precision that still puzzles modern engineers. Inside these monuments lay treasures, hieroglyphs, and the preserved bodies of kings, all echoing a single truth: Egypt was obsessed with eternity. Life was fleeting, but memory, if carved into stone, would last forever. To the east, across the subcontinent, the Indus Valley civilization rose in the shadows of the Himalayas. Cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa astonished with their order, straight streets, advanced drainage systems, and public granaries. These were not chaotic settlements, but carefully planned urban marvels. Yet their script, carved into seals and pottery, remains undeciphered, leaving us only fragments of their story. Who were they? What did they believe? And why did their civilization suddenly vanish? These are questions that still haunt archaeologists today. Meanwhile, in China, civilization blossomed along the Yellow River. The Shang dynasty developed sophisticated bronze work, weapons, and ritual vessels, while the Zhou introduced philosophies that shaped Chinese thought for centuries. Confucianism emphasized harmony and order, while Taoism celebrated balance with nature. These ideas were not just philosophies, they were survival strategies for society seeking order in a turbulent world. And from the east to the west, humanity's greatest minds were searching for meaning. It was not only kings and rulers who left their mark. The first codified laws, such as Hammurabi's Code, sought to regulate societies, drawing lines between justice and chaos. The first organized religions sought to explain life, death, and the mysteries of the cosmos, whether through the gods of Mesopotamia, the pantheon of Egypt, or the rituals of the Indus and Shang. Humans were beginning to weave stories that gave purpose to existence. Trade routes connected these far-flung civilizations. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan made its way into Mesopotamian temples. Egyptian gold gleamed in foreign courts. Spices, silks, and metals traveled across deserts and seas, stitching humanity into a tapestry of exchange. With every new connection, cultures learned from one another, adopting technologies, beliefs, and art forms that would ripple through time. Civilization was no longer a series of isolated islands. It was a growing web, but there was always a shadow. Civilizations rose, but they also fell. Droughts could starve empires. Invading armies could shatter kingdoms. Corruption and rebellion could hollow states from within. The same ingenuity that built cities could also create weapons of war. Ancient civilizations, as mighty as they seemed, were always vulnerable. And yet, with each collapse came rebirth. New powers emerged from the ashes of the old, carrying forward the lessons of those who came before. The dawn of humanity is not merely a tale of survival or conquest. It is a story of ambition, resilience, and curiosity. From the mud-brick houses of Mesopotamia to the pyramids of Egypt, from the lost streets of Harappa to the oracle bones of China, every stone, every inscription, every ruin whispers the same truth. Humanity was learning to master its world and itself. This was only the beginning. The ancient world laid the foundation for everything to come. For the medieval empires, the revolutions of modernity, and the age we now inhabit. But the deeper we look into these early civilizations, the more mysteries emerge. Who were the architects of these forgotten worlds? What secrets did they know that we have lost? And most haunting of all, could their forgotten past still hold answers to our uncertain future? The fall of Rome sent shockwaves across Europe. Once glorious cities crumbled into ruins, roads decayed, and knowledge that had defined an empire seemed to fade into darkness. For centuries, historians would call this time the Dark Ages, a term that suggests decline, but the truth is far more complex. Beneath the shadows of collapsing empires, a new world was being forged, one of castles and crusades, faith and fear, exploration, and extraordinary resilience. Europe fractured into countless kingdoms, where power was decentralized and loyalty tied to land. Feudalism became the architecture of society. Lords ruled over serfs, knights pledged allegiance to kings, and peasants toiled in the fields, bound by obligation rather than freedom. Towering castles dotted the landscape, not just as homes of nobility, but as fortresses against enemies both foreign and domestic. Life was uncertain, marked by famines, invasions, and disease, yet also by an unshakable belief that divine order governed every destiny. Religion reigned supreme. The Catholic Church was more than a spiritual institution. It was the heartbeat of medieval life. Cathedrals rose like stone mountains, their stained-glass windows telling stories to a largely illiterate population. Monks painstakingly copied manuscripts, preserving fragments of ancient Greek and Roman wisdom. Faith offered hope, structure, and purpose in a world that often seemed cruel. But it was also a force that ignited conflict. The Crusades, beginning in the 11th century, were both holy wars and worldly conquests. Armies marched from Europe to the Middle East, driven by a promise of salvation and the allure of land and glory. The clash between Christians and Muslims for control of Jerusalem spilled rivers of blood, but also opened the floodgates of cultural exchange. Returning crusaders brought with them spices, knowledge, and technologies from the Islamic world. The compass, advanced mathematics, and medical practices began to filter into Europe, quietly planting the seeds of a coming renaissance. Far from Europe, empires thrived with brilliance. In the Islamic Golden Age, cities like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba became beacons of learning. Scholars translated texts of Aristotle, Plato, and Galen, ensuring the survival of knowledge that Europe had nearly lost. In astronomy, medicine, and algebra, Islamic thinkers advanced understanding far beyond their time. Libraries like the House of Wisdom held manuscripts from across the world, binding together the intellectual threads of humanity. Meanwhile, Africa's medieval kingdoms flourished. The Empire of Mali, under the reign of Mansa Musa, became a powerhouse of wealth and scholarship. His legendary pilgrimage to Mecca was said to have been so extravagant that it disrupted entire economies with the sheer amount of gold he distributed. Timbuktu emerged as a hub of learning, where scholars debated theology, astronomy, and law, leaving behind manuscripts that still astonish historians today. In Asia, the dynasties of China stood as titans of civilization. The Tang and Song dynasties transformed society with groundbreaking inventions: gunpowder, movable type printing, and the magnetic compass. These were not just innovations, they were revolutions. The compass would guide sailors to unknown shores, gunpowder would change the nature of warfare forever, and printing would democratize knowledge in ways that reshaped culture. Cities like Chang'an thrived as cosmopolitan centers, buzzing with merchants, poets, and artisans who helped define one of the world's most advanced societies. But the medieval world was not shaped by innovation alone. It was carved by conquest. From the frozen fjords of Scandinavia, the Vikings surged forth, their dragon-proud ships cutting across seas to raid and trade. They terrorized coasts but also integrated into societies, settling in places as far apart as Normandy and North America. Then came the Mongols, led by Genghis Khan, whose horsemen swept across Asia with unmatched ferocity, building the largest contiguous empire in history. Their dominance reshaped trade routes and linked east to west, creating the Silk Road's golden age. On that very road, merchants carried silk, spices, and precious metals, but also ideas, art, and religion. Buddhism spread across Asia, Christianity into Europe, Islam into Africa and the East. Cultures collided, merged, and transformed. The world was no longer a series of isolated civilizations. It was becoming interconnected, bound by trade, conquest, and belief. In the Americas, far from Eurasian networks, civilizations rose with their own brilliance. The Maya built pyramids aligned with celestial events. The Aztecs constructed floating cities and mastered agriculture in harsh conditions, and the Inca engineered vast networks of roads through the Andes. Though disconnected from Europe and Asia, these societies rivaled any in complexity and creativity. Their monumental architecture and astronomical knowledge remind us that genius was not confined to one continent but spread across humanity. Yet, the medieval era was also haunted by catastrophe. The Black Death swept across Europe in the 14th century, wiping out nearly a third of the population. It was a calamity that shattered societies, but also one that, paradoxically, transformed them. Labor shortages empowered peasants to demand more rights, while old systems of feudal loyalty began to crumble. Out of death, change was born. By the late Middle Ages, cracks appeared in the old order. The Renaissance loomed on the horizon, promising rebirth through art, science, and rediscovery. But none of it would have been possible without the medieval world, the crucible of struggle and survival, of faith and innovation, of exploration and conquest. This era, often dismissed as a time of stagnation, was in truth a bridge, a passage from the ancient to the modern, carrying forward the knowledge, resilience, and ambition of countless civilizations. The medieval world may seem distant, shrouded in myths of knights, castles, and crusades, but its legacies are all around us, in our laws, our languages, our religions, our cities. It was an age of both darkness and dazzling light, and without it, the modern world would never have been born. The medieval world slowly faded, but in its ashes something extraordinary was awakening. The modern era did not begin with a whisper, it began with a roar. In the bustling cities of Renaissance Europe, artists, scientists, and thinkers rediscovered the wisdom of the ancients, and then dared to surpass it. The human mind, once constrained by dogma and tradition, began to break free. It was the dawn of a new way of thinking, a revolution not of sword and shield, but of ideas. The Renaissance was more than paintings on canvas or statues carved from marble. It was a rediscovery of humanity's potential. Leonardo da Vinci sketched flying machines centuries ahead of his time. Michelangelo carved stone into flesh. Galileo pointed his telescope toward the heavens and dared to challenge the very structure of the universe. These men were rebels in their own way, pushing against the boundaries of what was known, sparking a fire that would illuminate the path to modernity. But it was not just art and science that propelled humanity forward. Across Europe, the age of exploration unfurled sails to the winds. Brave, reckless, and often ruthless, explorers set out across oceans in search of riches, lands, and glory. Columbus reached the Americas, Vasco da Gama found his way to India, and Magellan's fleet circumnavigated the globe. The world was no longer infinite mystery. It was finite, mapped, and ready to be conquered. Yet this newfound connectivity came at a devastating cost. Entire civilizations in the Americas were decimated by disease, warfare, and colonization, their empires collapsing beneath the weight of European ambition. Still, the momentum of discovery could not be stopped. Trade routes expanded across seas, carrying not just gold and spices but languages, religions, and cultures. The Columbian Exchange brought new crops, animals, and ideas to every corner of the globe. Humanity was no longer living in separate worlds. The fates of continents had become inseparably intertwined. Then came the Enlightenment. Philosophers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and John Locke questioned authority, kingship, and the divine right of rulers. They argued that reason, liberty, and equality should guide society, not tradition or tyranny. Their words, written on parchment, became the sparks that ignited revolutions. In America, colonists broke away from Britain, declaring independence and building a nation on ideals of freedom, though riddled with contradictions that would haunt it for centuries. In France, revolution spilled blood in the streets of Paris, as peasants and citizens rose against monarchy and privilege, crying out for liberty, equality, and fraternity. Across the Atlantic in Europe, old orders crumbled, and new systems struggled to rise in their place. But the most profound revolution was not political, it was industrial. The Industrial Revolution transformed the world at a pace never before seen. Steam engines powered factories, trains thundered across landscapes, and cities swelled with workers leaving behind rural life. Humanity was no longer bound by the rhythms of the sun and the seasons. Machines dictated time, production, and progress. For the first time, humans could harness energy on a massive scale, fueling an era of invention and change. Yet progress came at a cost. Factories filled the air with smoke, workers labored in brutal conditions, and children toiled alongside adults for meager wages. Wealth concentrated in the hands of the few, while millions struggled to survive. The Industrial Revolution was both miracle and misery, a paradox that defined modernity itself. The 19th and early 20th centuries brought empires to their height. European powers carved Africa and Asia into colonies, exploiting lands and peoples in the name of progress and profit. Meanwhile, nationalism rose, binding people together through shared identity but also driving them into conflict. By the early 20th century, the stage was set for global catastrophe. World War I erupted in 1914, a war unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Trenches stretched for miles, machine guns and gas claimed millions of lives, and the old world order shattered. Yet the war to end all wars was but a prelude. Just 2 decades later, World War II plunged the globe into darkness again. The rise of fascism, the Holocaust, the dropping of atomic bombs, these events redefined the boundaries of human cruelty and power. The wars scarred the earth but also gave birth to a new era of international cooperation. The United Nations was formed, colonies sought independence, and the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union shaped global politics for decades. The mid-20th century also heralded a new frontier, space. Rockets once designed for war carried humans beyond the atmosphere. In 1969, the world watched as Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, leaving behind a single footprint that symbolized both human triumph and ambition. The space age had begun, and with it, humanity looked not just across oceans but to the stars. Technology continued to accelerate. The invention of computers, satellites, and the internet collapsed distances and rewrote communication itself. The modern age became defined by connection, an invisible web linking billions of people across continents in real time. Cultures collided and blended, economies intertwined, and the world became smaller, faster, and more fragile. Globalization reshaped not only trade but identity. Music, film, and ideas spread across borders in seconds, while financial markets and politics intertwined in unprecedented ways. At the same time, challenges grew. Climate change, inequality, pandemics, and political unrest remind us that the modern era is not an end, but a new chapter in humanity's ongoing struggle. The story of the modern age is not finished. It is still being written in every invention, every protest, every discovery, and every decision made by billions of people each day. From the Renaissance to the revolutions, from the factories of the industrial age to the satellites orbiting Earth, one truth becomes clear. Humanity has always been driven by curiosity, ambition, and the will to shape its own destiny. We are the heirs of every civilization that came before. The world we live in is built upon their triumphs and their tragedies. And as we stand at the edge of the present, staring into the unknown future, the lessons of history whisper their warnings. We have conquered the seas, the skies, even the stars, but the greatest challenge still lies ahead. Because if history has taught us anything, it is this. Every empire, every era, every power believes itself eternal. And yet, eternity is always shorter than we think. And as we look toward the horizon of tomorrow, one question remains. What secrets lie ahead, waiting to reshape our understanding of the world once more?